Hello, I am Lauren Heindel, the community manager for the Punchdown. And as you know, my mission here is to bring together the voices in the wine industry to support you with resources and a rich network of folks to lean on, learn from, and grow with. So a little bit about my background. I worked in production for many years, and then I transitioned to wine marketing when I discovered that my passion really lies in connecting with people in the industry and building community. So welcome to Expert Talks, where we dive into topics from company culture to operational excellence and financial procedures to support winemakers and professionals like you every day. Today's topic is the top 5 HR tips for businesses without an HR manager. And this topic will be really helpful for anyone who's on the admin side of the winery, or even if you're an employee at a winery who just want a refresher on these policies and the things that affect you in your workplace. Today, I am super excited to introduce you to our expert, Jess Hart, also known as Jessica Hart. She is the operator and owner of Jessica Hart Consulting. So Jess has been a force in the world of wine and food and HR. So I'm very pleased to bring her story to you and her expertise to you today. Just a quick disclaimer, this advice is only from the experience of Jess Hart and in no way should be taken as official legal advice. You can reach out to Jess if you have follow-up questions. And welcome, Jess. Can you give us a little intro into yourself, what you do and what you offer?
Yeah. I guess first, in no way, shape, or form have I ever gone to law school. So to double down on what you're saying, this is not legal advice by any, way, shape, form. But yeah, I'm Jessica Hart. I grew up in Petaluma, so in Sonoma County. And now throughout the course of my life, I find myself doing HR in the wine industry. So to unravel those bookends, I never grew up thinking that I wanted to be in HR, and just through the course of my life, I got there. But I have 2 formal degrees, so that's something people like to know. I have an undergrad in HR and organizational behavior from Sacramento State, and then I have a master's in business administration from Sonoma State. And then in terms of HR certification, I also have the HR cert from Sonoma State. Throughout that, though, I think that education is important, but also life experiences are important when it comes into HR. So my background comes from Target. I did a lot of HR with them when they were growing and opening a lot of different locations across California and the US. So mass hiring, mass staffing, mass things, right? It's Target. They're huge. And
huge,
then
yes.
From there, it was going into Heineken and Lagunitas because Heineken just bought Lagunitas. And that's where I really got into the Bev Alc space and getting into hospitality, was being with them through all the post-merger M&A. So I was with them for a very, very long time. Shout out to all the alumni and friends out there. And then I also helped them with their partnership that they had with a different facility in Florida. So with that, I helped with a Heineken partnership, I guess is the best way to say it, is where Heineken bought a part of a business in Florida, and I helped HR from that lens from California. So all that to say is lots of different experiences, lots of different cultures, lots of different states. Just like trying to ship alcohol from state to state is very different. Shipping people or having people work in different states is very different. And so now I find myself supporting the small, medium-sized businesses because I find it really funny. And maybe funny isn't the word, but I find it ironic that we're all held to these same laws, but we don't have the same resources in our organizations and in our businesses. So it's almost comical in the fact that it's like not realistic, like really, haha, than anything else. And so I help businesses either implement HR or audit or take off some things off their plate.
Wonderful. I mean, such important work, and it's much needed in this industry, the wine industry, that is. And I remember when we were talking, you were sharing your story on how you got into HR. So if you feel, so obliged, could you share that with us right now? Just like a brief overview.
Yeah. So I was in college and like I said, zero desire to go into HR, 100% zero. I remember, I applied to school. And I only applied to get a business degree because I was like, oh, well, that's what people do. Like they go to school and get a business degree. I had no idea what that meant. So then they put you through, your prereqs. And I'm going through prereqs and it says that I have to do 3 classes in HR. And I remember I called my mom and I'm like, Mom, I have to do HR. I do not want to be the police of business. Like, why would I do that? She's like, well, you have to. So and I'm sitting in this class and I learned about meal premiums and overtime and all of these things. And I just remember sitting there because at the time I was working for an organization that was a franchise. The owners were awesome, still awesome. And they went into a franchise situation where they had someone else cutting their payroll for them throughout multiple franchises. It was based in California. And I say that because they weren't doing it, I don't know if I want to say correctly, but clearly how they were executing their payroll wasn't in line with the law. And so I'm sitting there in this class and I'm learning about overtime and meal premiums. And I literally just went to my teacher and I was like, just so I make sure I hear this correctly, overtime happens after 8 hours in a day. And a meal premium is when I don't get a lunch or can't take an uninterrupted lunch before my 5th consecutive hour of working. And then that results in more pay. Is that correct? And she was like, yeah. And I realized at that moment that that wasn't happening for me and that wasn't my experience. And so I got into HR because I know what it feels like to be that employee that's like, wait, what? Like, that's not what's going on for me. And like, that sucks to feel like it's like this aha moment and then bring it to your employer and have to lobby for yourself to educate them on something that you didn't know, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe they don't know. And how do we fix it? Because also no one wants to go to work and be like, wait, but they're breaking the law, right? Like that doesn't make you feel like warm and fuzzy. So throughout that whole experience, that's what really made it for me where I wanted to go into HR, because I didn't want an employee to have to go through all the steps I had to go to and all the experiences I had to live to try and explain something that is not new and it's relatively simple, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And on the other side, as an employer, you are here now to empower them and to help them know the law so that they're in compliance and their employees feel empowered and they feel like they are, taken care of in the right way. Correct?
Yeah. And I think that where it's just not realistic for business owners to keep up with all this crap. Like what I do for business owners is I one, keep up on it, but then two, I also know that what's written as guidelines or the law or whatever word you want to use, right? Whatever is passed is never thought of from a business owner mindset or a production mindset or, just an implementation. It's like, hey, this is a really great idea, but the intent doesn't match the impact onto the organization. And so I help businesses kind of figure out how do we bring this to life.
Yeah, matching that up and bringing it to reality. I love that. Well, I love a great origin story, and I just really loved that story, and it's inspiring to have such a young experience transform your entire life. Well, let's dive in. If you could give us just kind of an overarching, quick, what is HR and what does it actually do for your business? Just kind of from your point of view.
Sure. So HR is the stuff that you don't see, but it impacts your revenue and your operating profit 100%. And that is because you have people in the wine industry that are either representing your brand or they're pouring your wine or they're working on your wine. The people are the things that are making it happen so that you can then sell that product or that experience. And with that, HR is not a me thing. It also doesn't need to be someone with a title. It's just the actual practices and policies and things of going about your business. So for me, HR is in an identity crisis. You've got people that call it the personnel department back in the day. You've got people that call it HR. You've got people that call it the people and professional development organization. You call it human capital. Like, it's all of these fancy things, but really what it is it's what the smell of the place is. Like, what I mean by that is, like, if you walk into a garbage can, it's going to smell.
Yes.
So if I walk into a business and your team isn't happy, you can feel that, right? And so that's what HR is to me is, are you transparent in your expectations? Do people know why they're even giving you their life? Because it's their time. Like, they're trading their time for money and they can't get that time back. So are these things working together? So it's not really a black and white answer for me on what is HR. It's HR is everything, and you can definitely get it wrong.
Oh, I'm sure. And it leads perfectly into our topic today, because, you can get it wrong, or you can not have the resources in your facility to have a full-time HR person who's dedicated to making sure that these things are in order. So you came up with a great idea of breaking down the top 5 HR tips that you have for wine businesses who don't have a full-time HR person. So let's go on that. Let's go one by one down that list. So the first tip from you, what would that be?
So that's going to be pay and compensation.
Okay.
super excited to jump into that. Now, depending what state this winery will be in will depend on how I kind of unravel the onion. So bear with me for a second. But if you're in California, right, we have minimum pay by state. We also have minimum pay by city. So that's important to make sure that you don't miss that. Then you also have, in a lot of cases in tasting rooms, you have tips. And so you have to report those tips in, and it impacts your payroll taxes and all of those things. So it's really important to make sure that you have all of those correct. Back to what I was talking about first, right, about the meal premiums and overtime and rest breaks and stuff. That is something that a lot of business owners don't realize. And when they go on the website to read about it, it gets really confusing. There's always a debate about what this means. And if you don't believe me, please just call an employment lawyer, because this is how it goes. It's like, this is how it is. If you want to pay for the hours, go for it. But I'm just telling you that this is what the answer is. Before the 5th consecutive hour worked, your employee has to take a lunch if they're working over 6 hours. Now, what does that mean? That means if I start work at 7 a.m., 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 11:59, your employee should be clocking out and going to lunch. That lunch should be 30 minutes uninterrupted. You're not texting them. They're not walking around with a walkie-talkie. Nothing like that. They can leave. They can go to Target if they want to. They can go wherever they want. They are free to do the things. Now, that's important, because if you don't do that, if they can't take an uninterrupted break, or if they can't clock out by that 5th consecutive hour, you now owe them what's called a meal premium. And a meal premium is 1 hour of pay for making that mistake. Now, that's basically the state saying, hey, don't be a jerk, employer, give people lunches, right? And so they put money associated with it. Now, you can choose as an employer not to do it, sure, but you're rolling the dice on the fact that it's literally breaking the law, and wage and hour things are very, very simple and black and white in the state of California, to then have the employee get represented by the state to then sue you. Okay. Now, when we're talking outside of California, there's other states that have similar things, but I like to use the example of talking about like Tennessee, for example, or maybe Chicago. But there are other states, there are other cities in the US that have basically what's called a tipped minimum wage. So they have, and this is not California, to be clear, but they have a minimum wage that's lower because you are in a role that receives tips to bring you up to it. Now, why that's very bizarre for a lot of people outside of California is because it's a very large manual process on the personnel expense side that business owners might forget that if their employee doesn't claim the right amount of tips, now they have to make up that amount anyways. Or if they don't have the process correct and then they're underpaying people to the minimum wage, like this, maybe the software system, right, doesn't think about these things. Anyways, I'm getting a little bit in the weeds, but pay and compensation and meal breaks and making sure that you understand what applies to your winery and your employees' experience is crucial. The other piece I will throw out there is, please do not just make them salaried employees because it's better for their life or because you don't want to have people clock in and out. That is not a reason to make someone salary, and there are reasons.
That's interesting. I don't know if we have time to get into that today, but maybe we'll do another session on salaried versus hourly.
Yeah.
Well, great. So that's tip number 1. Let's go to tip number 2. What would you say is important to know?
For sure. So tip number 2 would be, make sure that you understand if your employees are using their personal device for work. Because in states like California and other ones, you have to have a line item to reasonably compensate them for using their own personal device, amongst other things. So if you have your employee clock in and clock out on their phone, or you require them to download an app so that they can email you, right? All of those type of things specific to California, and there are other states too. And I'm just speaking from the California lens since I'm literally sitting here right now.
Yeah.
It's just something to think about, stipends and other different line items of reimbursement.
Great. I think, we live in a world now where our phones are a part of our everyday life, and it's hard to live in that blurred line of, I'll just open up my email on my phone, and I'll just, text my boss back really quickly, which I know we're going to get into later, but having that outlined from your company and having those clear expectations, and that will go really far in like the employees' feeling of well-being and, feeling like they're properly compensated for using their phone maybe after hours or during times when like they normally wouldn't if we were in the workforce 20, 30 years ago, you know?
Yeah.
Great. So, okay, we got 1 and 2. Let's do tip number 3.
Number 3, and everyone hates it because they want to set them on fire. It's a handbook. I know you hate them. I know you don't want to read them. I know you don't want to make them. But what the handbook does is it takes the like, hey, this is what we say we do, and puts it on paper. And so for both respecting your employee and being the employer, it's like, hey, these are our lines in the sand, and this is what we're going to do about those things. It's also crucial because it communicates at-will employment to the employee and to the employer. So I think a lot of people also forget that we are 50 different states, and what is common here is not common there, which is why I'm trying to very specifically speak to like what state might apply and might not. But like Montana is not an at-will state. Oh, so wow. Like there are things like that out there, and that is why your handbook matters, is because it communicates those things.
Yeah. And I remember you mentioning something, because handbooks are something that you do all the time for your clients. You said something about QR codes. Can you remind me?
Oh, like, sure. Yeah. So in wineries, I mean, the reality is you probably got someone on the vineyard, you probably got someone in a tasting room, you might have someone in a cellar, right? The team is not sitting at a desk reading, paperwork and legal jargon that you send to stay compliant. Like, that's just the reality. And so with a lot of my clients, what I do is I put the handbook on a QR code so that then I can update it on the back end, and then they're always in compliance for the 12 calendar months that they have that live. And so basically it just makes it something very simple. And that's where I tell a lot of people that, like, hey, ask your person that does the handbook to put it as a live link on a QR code and for them to maintain it for you throughout, whether it's a year or 6 months or whatever, depending on, what system or software you're using, because then that it's accessible, which is also important, because if you can't have it accessible, then who cares what you wrote down on this piece of paper? It's not enforceable.
Yeah. And I remember you mentioning something too, like if you're not reading it, they're not reading it. And
oh, no. And that's the thing that's so funny is like, I'll get a handbook and it's like 96 pages. And so my next question will be like, okay, so when's the last time you read this? Oh, I don't need to read that. Oh, okay. Well, if you're not going to read it, your team's not going to read it. And so now how are you going to enforce something that you didn't read and they didn't read from a realistic, right? I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus here. It's just like, this is human nature. And honestly, I don't want to read 96 pages either. I get it. Like, I'm not judging.
Yeah. And I just love the idea of the QR code or like a localized cloud, because most of the times when you're turning to a handbook is when you have a question right then and there. You're like, what is the pay time off policy? Or like, how many sick days do I get this year? What is the, holiday like schedule or something like that? And you want to be able to pull it up and access it. You're going to probably forget to go dig it out of your closet when you get home. So I just love that. Okay, so let's talk about tip number 4.
Sure. It kind of goes back to that QR code stuff, but it's basically realizing that HR should be flexible in the business. It's got to be fancy letterhead for the write-up to count. It is not like, oh, we need an employee signature on the PIP for it to count. That's not how it is. It's more the conversation happened and was it documented in a way. So a very simple way that works throughout wineries, throughout production, very fast paced, is that if you are to have a coaching conversation with a team member, just shoot them a text or an email, or even email yourself. Hey, talk to so-and-so on this day. Boom. Right? You can do something very simple, and it doesn't need to be this like sit down conversation printed out, sign on the dotted line type situation.
I think that one is the most shocking to me, because we're always told like you have to have their signature, you have to get their approval. And even you're right, just the conversation and acknowledging the conversation is enough. But yeah, I was definitely most shocked when you shared that with me, because I was just like, what? You could send a text message and that is efficient? Like, wow.
It's documented. I mean, I guess to add to your point about like the signatures and stuff, like, what are you going to do if the employee says, I refuse to sign that?
Yeah.
Well, what you do is you write refuse to sign, date and time, and then it's fine.
We have one more tip, and I think that this one, is really unique to the industry. So you want to share this 5th and final tip that you have outlined here?
Sure. I would say that the 5th tip is that you need to have a responsible consumption plan and policy and just experience. Like, you need to know, what are you going to do when a patron has too much from maybe wine tasting, right? They could have been fine when they got to your place, and then 20 minutes later they're not because of the rest of their day. And it's not your team that overpoured, right? It's the course of the day. It's making sure that your team members that are guest facing like that have responsible beverage serving licenses up to date. It's making sure that if you are hosting a company party and you're letting people get home, that they're getting home safely. Are you doing a corporate Uber ride, a Lyft code or whatever, and sponsoring them to get home? It's, hey, what happens after, you get your shifty? And what do we expect? It's a bigger conversation, but it's making sure that you have a responsible consumption policy from a guest facing, but then also internally, right? Like a back of house thing. And what I mean by that is, you don't get to go to sensory or to wine tasting and then jump on a forklift, right?
Oh, yeah.
You can't do some
absolutely not
things. So it's just making sure that businesses have that, and also know when they see someone that is under the influence, because that will happen, that we are in the business of alcohol, that they know and their managers know what to do. Like, for example, if someone's drunk at work, or you think that they're impaired at work, so you want to send them home, well, you don't send them home in their car. If they're not responsible enough to be on 2 feet at work, you're not going to send them behind the wheel. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So making sure that your managers have a responsible consumption policy and process in place is important.
I love that. And growing up in Napa, and I'm sure you grew up in this area too, it's becoming more and more, of an important thing to make sure that everyone is safe, operating with like a greater sense of safety for our community as well. So I love that. I'm a big fan of responsible consumption and policies. So I think that is such a great power list to have in your business. But another question for you, what do you do to keep up to date on all these changing laws in California and other states? Because I know you work with clients all over the US. And are there any new laws that people should be aware of that will affect them?
So from a federal level, the things that people are going to want to look at are going to be basically around the salary test. And so basically back to that hourly and salaried worker thing, and also the minimum salary required. A lot of people forget about that, is that it's not just an hourly worker that has a minimum salary. There is a federal salary, there is a state salary. So those things are really important to know. But then overall, what I do to stay involved in those things is I'm heavily involved in different lobbying administration type work, so that I can hear from the senators or from the assembly before they pitch things, so I can kind of hear what's kind of in the works and what do I think is going to get legs or not. I do this by being a part of SHRM, which is the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, organization, and going to Capitol lobbying things for them, but then also being a part of a local restaurant lobbying group in San Francisco. In terms of an update that I would make sure that people are aware of, there's the workplace violence stuff in California that, has to be in progress in July. So we're already there, and then implemented shortly after. But then that's been getting a lot of social media traction. But what impacts our groups here in Wineries is the interaction between the hidden junk fee ban and then also the restaurant service charge exclusion. So if anyone wants to Google it, it's Senate Bill 478 in California, and then it's Senate Bill 1524 in California. Basically saying, hey, you can't just throw on all these fees after the fact. But then with the restaurant service charge exclusion, you can still do that. So basically, if I just take it as a one sentence, you're like, what the hell did you just say to me? How do I say this? So when your employees care about this, because when you do an auto gratuity of 6 or more, right, for a tasting or a service charge for a buyout or stuff like that, you then can incentivize your employees to come and do that event because there's some sort of guaranteed perk, right? Guaranteed tip type thing that goes on. Now, the first one, the hidden fees ban, 478, was like, hey, nope, you got to take all that out. You got to tell people up front on their invoice what they're getting paid and move on. Well, this restaurant exclusion came in, Senate Bill 1524, that said restaurants and bars and other things like that don't have to do that. So all that to say is that there's some people that jumped and were like, nope, we're just going to do it all inclusive, and we're taking tipping away. There's some people that kept it. And that's more of a strategic decision for HR in your business to have as a conversation. I don't have like a quick blurb on it. It depends on employee compensation. It depends on how you pay the tips out. Do you do tip splitting? There's plenty of things that go into it there, but that's something I would tell people to Google. So 478-1524 if you're in California. Google those.
Amazing. Super important. And just fantastic information, honestly. And thank you for sharing all of this, Jessica. So let's go kind of back to the top. If somebody wanted to work with you, what would that look like?
So, in terms of working with me, first you can find me on my website, Jessica Hart, where it's HART consulting.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn, which is also really fun. I post a lot of polls on there because I like to gain interest on if people have awareness of these things. But typical engagements with me are anywhere from 3 to 6 months and then beyond, because we want to do an HR assessment. We want to understand what is the current lay of the land, and then I will also do a risk analysis, present those to the business owner or whomever I'm working with so that they can make decisions. From there, we'll make decisions, and I will implement in that 3rd month or 6th month. I say 3 to 6 months because it really depends on the size of the business, like how much stuff do we have to investigate, right, and dig down into. In addition to that, we do employee handbooks so that it's monitored on the back end, kind of something I chatted about here before, where it's in compliance for 12 months. But then to work with me, again, we just kind of chat through those things. It really is more of an HR consulting business that's tailored to the wine industry. And I understand what it's like working with people where drinking is a part of their job, right? We're tasting for quality, and we've got people out driving around, going into the trade. Like, there's a lot of nuance there, which is why I focus in this space.
Yeah, I love that. We need people like you. But fantastic information. And again, thank you for your time, Jessica. If you want to reach out to her, like you said, find her at Jessica Hart, HART consulting.com, or LinkedIn. I follow you on LinkedIn and I love what you post. So keep it up. But thank you. This has been another episode of Expert Talks on the Punchdown. And thank you again, Jessica. We'll talk soon. Bye.
Bye.